The day the appraiser called me back about Walter's watch, Kim was still in my front hallway, telling her sister where to stack the folding chairs for the Christmas Eve dinner she'd decided, without asking me, that we would be hosting in my house. She had no idea what she'd sent to the donation bin 3 weeks earlier. She had no idea that a scratched-up stainless steel watch with a cracked crystal was, in fact, the key to $2.3 million, and that, by the time her guests arrived that night, it would no longer belong to anyone in this family but me. But to understand why that phone call changed everything, you need to know what happened 3 weeks before that. In my own kitchen, on the morning Kim decided my husband's things were clutter. Walter and I were married 39 years. People say that number now like it's supposed to impress them, and I suppose it does, but to me it was never 39 of anything. It was just Tuesday, and then it was another Tuesday, and somewhere in between 4 decades happened without either of us noticing the math. We met at a church potluck in the fall of 1962, both of us 22, both of us there because our mothers had insisted. He didn't say more than 11 words to me that whole evening, and I remember thinking he was either the most boring man in the room or the most careful one. And it took me another 3 months of Sunday dinners to figure out it was the second thing. Walter never wasted a word in his life. When he finally did ask me to marry him, on a bench outside the tool and die plant where he'd just started work, he said exactly this: "I don't have much yet, but I intend to." That was the whole proposal. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. He was a quiet man. Not shy quiet, the way a well-built machine is quiet, all its noise on the inside where it belongs. He worked the floor at Ashford Tool and Die for 31 years, came home every night smelling of machine, oil and cold air, and never once complained about a single day of it. Not even the year they cut his hours. Not even the year his own father died 2 weeks before Christmas and he went back to work the following Monday. Because that, Cully's what you did. He wasn't a man who announced his love. He showed it in the driveway he cleared before I woke up so my heels wouldn't slip on the ice. He showed it in the car. He warmed up every winter morning so I wouldn't have to sit in the Maine cold for even 30 seconds. He showed it in the porch step he fixed 3 separate times over the course of one October because he wasn't satisfied with good enough when it came to something I'd walk on every day. He wasn't a romantic man in the way people mean it in movies. He was a romantic man in the way that mattered. The kind who remembered which mug I liked my coffee in and which one I only used when I was upset, and never once brought me the wrong one. He wore the same watch every day of our marriage that I can remember. A steel Omega Seamaster he bought secondhand in 1962, off a pawn shop shelf in town, with money he'd saved out of his very first real paycheck, instead of buying himself a new coat. That winter, he had it engraved on the back before he ever proposed to me, months before, when it was still just a watch he was proud of and not yet a symbol of anything. 40 hours ahead, asterisk, he told me once, half joking, over dinner maybe 15 years into our marriage, that a man should own exactly one good watch in his whole life, and it should be good enough to bury him in. I laughed and told him that was morbid. He shrugged and said it wasn't morbid, it was efficient. That was Walter in one sentence. I'm the one who ended up burying that same joke with him, decades later, exactly the way he'd planned it. Or so I thought, before I understood he'd planned quite a bit more than that. Every Sunday morning of our marriage, I made him eggs. Low heat, patient, 2 eggs, and no more. In the same cast iron pan we bought together, as newlyweds for $11 we didn't really have. Timed so they'd be ready the exact minute he walked back in from checking on the garage, which he did every single Sunday regardless of whether the garage needed checking on at all. The smell of butter just starting to brown. The sound of the side door easing shut. His boots on the mat. That was the whole architecture of our Sundays for 39 years. It wasn't a big thing. It was just ours. The way certain small rituals belong entirely to 2 people and nobody else ever quite understands why. I loved him without condition, and without ever needing him to be more than he already was, which I've come to understand is rarer than people think. I thought a marriage like ours, steady, unglamorous, built slow and built to last, meant we'd always be looked after by the family we'd built together, that the same care he gave me would simply continue on through our son, through the family that grew up around us. I was wrong. Walter passed 14 months ago. Heart in his sleep, no warning, no goodbye, no chance for either of us to say the things people always assume they'll have more time to say, which I've since decided was very like him, quiet even in that, quiet all the way to the end. Daniel, our son, and Kim moved in with me for what Kim called just through the holidays, Nora. So you're not alone in that big house. Back when Walter first passed and I could barely remember to eat dinner most nights, let alone manage a house by myself, I was grateful, genuinely grateful, for those first few months. 14 months later, though, they were still there, and somewhere in that stretch of time, without my ever agreeing to it out loud, Kim had started referring to my house as the house, not your house, Nora, not home, in a tone that made it sound less like the place I'd raised my son in and more like a shared asset that happened to have my name on the deed. Small things had been shifting for months before the watch. She'd rearranged the living room to open up the flow. She'd repainted the guest bathroom a soft gray, without asking, apologizing after the fact with, "I just thought it needed freshening up, Nora. You don't mind, do you?" She'd started making dinner decisions for the whole household without checking whether I already had plans, whether I'd already thawed something, whether I even wanted company that particular evening. I let each one go. I told myself that's what you do when your son's wife is trying, in her own way, to make herself useful, to earn her place in a grieving house. 3 weeks before Christmas, Kim announced, not asked, announced, that she wanted to host her whole family for Christmas Eve. Her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, cousins I'd met maybe twice at her and Daniel's wedding, 8 years earlier, in my home, on the first Christmas Eve I would spend without Walter sitting at the head of that same table. "We just need to clear out some of the clutter first," she said, standing in the doorway of Walter's den with a roll of black trash bags looped over one wrist, like she'd already made up her mind about what belonged in them. "Get it looking presentable for company. Some of Dad's old things," she clarified, almost cheerfully. When I asked her, carefully, gently, what exactly she meant by clutter, I told myself she didn't mean it the way it sounded. She was stressed about hosting 14 people in a house that wasn't hers. People say careless things when they're stressed, I reminded myself. I'd raised a son who chose a woman with a good heart somewhere underneath all the noise and the certainty. That's what I told myself, standing right there in the doorway of the one room in the house that still smelled faintly of machine oil. If you stood still long enough and breathed in deep, if I'd said something to her plainly that morning, not hinted, not hoped she'd read the room, but said it outright, I've wondered since whether any of this would have happened the way it did. But I didn't know yet what some of Dad's old things would come to mean, or how quickly clutter, in Kim's vocabulary, could come to include the one object my husband had spent 30 years quietly building an entire future around. I found out about the guest list from Kim's sister, not from Kim, over a phone call that started with, "So excited for Christmas Eve at your place, Nora. 14 of us. Can you believe it? 14 people coming to my house on Christmas Eve, and nobody had asked whether I even wanted a crowd this year." My first Christmas without Walter. The first Christmas I'd have to figure out what to do with the silence where his voice used to be at the head of the table. When I brought it up to Kim directly, standing in the hallway with a laundry basket on my hip, she barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, I figured you'd be happy for the distraction, Nora. Sitting around by yourself all day can't be good for you." Then she moved past me, down the hall with a stack of folded tablecloths that used to be mine, from my own linen closet, without asking. 2 days later, Kim's mother came by early to help set up chairs and greenery. I was in the kitchen, out of sight but not out of earshot, when I heard Kim in the next room, holding up Walter's old cardigan, the gray one with the leather buttons he wore every winter evening for as long as I'd known him, the one that still smelled faintly of him if you buried your face in it, laughing. "Can you imagine keeping this? It's practically falling apart. Some people just can't let go of anything. Her mother laughed along, said something about how the elderly get attached to strange things. I stood at my own stove, spatula in hand, and said nothing, because I still believed, foolishly, that saying something out loud would only make me the difficult one in my own house. That evening, once the mother had gone home, I sat Kim down at the kitchen table and asked her, as calmly and reasonably as I knew how, if we could go through Walter's things together, slowly, when she had time. At my pace instead of hers, I told her some of it mattered to me more than she could probably understand, and that I just needed a little more time before anything left this house. Kim reached over and patted my hand the way you'd pat a nervous dog. Of course, Nora. Whatever you need, I completely understand. 3 days later, half the hallway closet was already gone, and she'd never once come to find me first. The morning of the incident, 5 days before the party, I came downstairs earlier than usual and found a stack of bins lined up by the front door, already sealed, marked for donation in Kim's handwriting. Walter's reading glasses, his flannel shirts folded with more care than I'd expected, which somehow made it worse. And on top of the nearest bin, tossed in almost as an afterthought, his watch. The crystal already cracked, clearly knocked around loose in the bin along with everything else. It's not like it even works right anymore anyway, Nora, Kim said, catching me frozen in the hallway, staring. We need the closet space cleared out for coats. People are coming in 5 days, and this house needs to actually look lived in, not like a museum. I picked the watch up out of the bin with both hands. Careful. The way you'd pick up something that had already been hurt once. Kim actually sighed at me, an exasperated, put-upon sound like I was the inconvenience. It's not like he needs it anymore, Nora, she said. You have to let go eventually. It's just a watch. Then, before I could say a single word, she reached over, took it back out of my hands, and set it down on top of the sealed bin like it was nothing at all. Like it hadn't been on Walter's wrist for 39 straight years. And called down this hall for Daniel to come load the car for the donation run. I didn't say anything. I picked up my coffee, and I noticed my hand wasn't shaking anymore. Something in me had gone quiet. Not tired quiet. Not the quiet of a woman who's given up. The kind of quiet that comes right before a decision nobody can talk you out of. I watched Daniel carry the bin out to the car. I watched the trunk close, and somewhere behind my ribs, 39 years of being agreeable to keep the peace finally ran out. What Kim didn't know, what nobody in that house knew, including Daniel, was that 4 years before he died, Walter had sat me down at this same kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday and told me something he'd never told our son. He'd just come from a doctor's appointment that had rattled him more than he let on. Nora, he said, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands the way he did when he was working up to something. If anything ever happens to my watch, you call Harold Finch. Don't wait. Don't wonder why. Just call him. I'd asked who Harold Finch even was, and Walter had just smiled that small, closed-mouth smile of his and said, "A man who's been keeping something safe for us for a long time." I'd nodded, filed it away the way you file away things you assume you'll never need, and mostly forgotten it in the ordinary business of the years that followed. Until I was standing in my own driveway, watching a donation bin disappear down the street, with that exact watch inside it. I went back inside, and I smiled through the rest of that day exactly the way Kim expected me to. I helped fold napkins. I admired her centerpiece, the one made from pine cones she'd spray-painted gold in my own garage. I even complimented the seating chart. And the second the house had gone quiet that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table with Walter's old leather address book, found the entry for H. Finch, Esquire, in his careful block handwriting, and I called the number. Before I could talk myself out of it, even though it was nearly 10 o'clock, Harold picked up on the third ring, sounding not the least bit surprised to hear from me, which in hindsight should have told me everything. Harold Finch had been Walter's patent attorney since 1988, back when Walter, a machinist by trade, an inventor entirely by accident, spent 2 years of nights and weekends in our garage designing a valve seal mechanism. That solved a leakage problem the whole industry had quietly been living with for decades. Ashford's parent company ended up licensing the design for use across nearly half the industrial valve market in the country. Walter never told a single soul about it besides me and Harold. He didn't want to be the man with money at Sunday dinners, didn't want anyone treating him differently, least of all his own son. He wanted the royalties reinvested quietly, folded into a trust that grew slow and boring in the background. Exactly the way he built everything else in his life. Nora, Harold said, once I'd explained, voice steady but careful. I've been wondering when I'd hear from you. There's a trust, $2.3 million, give or take, after 30-some years of compounding and reinvestment. Walter structured the succession so that transfer to you as trustee requires physical presentation of his watch, the actual object, verified against a serial number on file, not just paperwork or a photograph. It's an old-fashioned safeguard, the kind he liked, but it's legally binding. And Nora, I have to tell you, there's a filing deadline, 90 days from the date of his passing, or the trust reverts automatically to its fallback charitable designation. You have 11 days left. My stomach dropped clean through the kitchen floor. The watch that had just left my house in a sealed donation bin, headed to some warehouse or thrift shelf or, God forbid, a landfill, was the only thing standing between me and either, claiming what my husband had spent 30 years quietly building for me, or losing it forever to a clause neither Kim nor Daniel even knew existed. I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't panic either. Panicking never solved a single problem in 39 years of marriage to a man who solved everything with a list and a plan. And I wasn't about to start now. I made a list of every donation center, thrift shop, and charity drop-off within 20 miles. I was on the phone before the sun came up, calling each one in order, asking the same careful questions, writing down every name of every person I spoke with in case I needed to call back. On the fourth call, a young man at Grace Street Mission Thrift told me, a little apologetically, that they'd received several bins from a donation run matching that description 2 days prior, and that a watch steel, cracked crystal, looked maybe expensive, maybe not, hard to tell, was sitting untouched in their back room because nobody on staff could decide whether it was worth pricing at $3 or $30. I was in the car before he finished the sentence. I drove faster than I have in years and ran a stop sign 4 blocks from my own house that I have obeyed without fail for 4 decades. It was still there. I held it in both hands in the parking lot of that thrift store. Crystal cracked, clasp scuffed, and I laughed out loud. An ugly, relieved, entirely undignified sound that startled a man loading boxes nearby because, for the first time in 14 months, I felt Walter still one careful step ahead of everyone, still taking care of me from wherever he'd gone. He'd built himself a plan, tucked it in a watch, and trusted that I would be the one steady enough to see it through. They had no idea I'd already made the call, already made the drive, already sat across a desk from Harold Finch with the watch resting between us, while Kim finished spray painting pine cones gold in my garage for her. The party. I was 3 careful steps ahead of every single person in that house. Harold met me at his office 2 days later, a modest second-floor suite above a dry cleaner's that Walter had apparently been visiting quietly, once or twice a year, for over 3 decades without ever once mentioning it to me. The original trust documents were spread across his desk in neat, tabbed order, and beside them sat something I hadn't expected at all. A second manila folder, labeled in Walter's own blocky, careful handwriting in case Nora needs backup. Inside were 2 notarized letters. One authorized Harold to act on my behalf, without question or delay, the moment the watch was presented and verified. The other was addressed simply, to whoever tries to talk her out of this. Walter had apparently suspected, even 4 years before he died, sitting healthy and unbothered at our kitchen table, that someone in this family might one day try to make his widow smaller than she actually was. He asked me to keep half an eye on things after he was gone. Harold told me, sliding the folder across the desk with 2 fingers. Not in an intrusive way. Walter wasn't a controlling man. You know that better than anyone. But he asked me every year or so when we'd meet to review the trust whether things still seemed steady at home. I've been watching this particular situation build for a while now, Nora. If I'm honest, the way Daniel's wife has been redoing rooms in your house one at a time, like she already owned the deed. I didn't say anything sooner because it wasn't my place to. I was waiting for you to see it too, in your own time. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone else to say that sentence out loud. To confirm that I hadn't imagined the slow, creeping shift in my own home until he actually said it. We spent almost 2 hours going through everything that afternoon. The original patent filings from 1994, thick with Walter's small, precise margin notes, the 3 decades of trust statements, and a short, handwritten letter Walter had left with Harold specifically for me, which I read twice through and then folded carefully back into its envelope. Because some things are for exactly one person and nobody else needs to hear them read aloud. Harold agreed to come with me to the Christmas Eve dinner in person. Not to fight any battle on my behalf, he was careful to say, but simply so that when I laid the documents on that table, in front of 14 guests and a family that had grown accustomed to underestimating me, nobody in that room would be able to dismiss what I said as an old woman's confusion or grief talking. For the first time in 14 months, walking out of that office and down the narrow staircase to the street, I didn't feel like I was facing that house or that family entirely alone. Christmas Eve arrived exactly the way Kim had planned it, down to the last detail. 14 guests, a table set with my own grandmother's china that Kim had borrowed from the hutch without ever asking, candles down the center in brass holders that used to be mine, a fire crackling in the hearth Walter built with his own 2 hands 30 years ago, in a house he'd have hardly recognized as decorated by anyone but me. I took my time getting ready that evening, longer than I had in months. I wore the navy dress Walter always said made me look like I was about to fire someone, the one I'd worn to exactly 2 funerals and 1 retirement dinner in 20 years. I put on my own mother's pearls, the ones that had sat in a velvet box untouched since her passing, because it felt, that particular night, like the right occasion to finally take them out. I walked down my own staircase into my own dining room like a woman with somewhere important to be, because for the first time in 14 months, I did. Kim glanced at me from across the room, already half turned away, already moving on to check the ham in the oven. Glad you're joining us, Nora. Try to relax tonight. Okay? No need to be in your head about anything. It's Christmas. She said it lightly, kindly even, the way you'd say it to someone you'd already stopped taking seriously. Months ago, I smiled at her. I let her finish plating the appetizers, let her fuss over the wine glasses, let her direct her mother where to set the gravy boat. I said nothing while the guests arrived, one by one, complimenting the greenery, admiring the china they had no idea was mine. And then, once every seat was filled and Harold Finch had quietly settled into the chair I'd asked Daniel, a few days earlier, to set for an old friend of your father's. A request Daniel hadn't thought twice about. Because sons rarely question a request like that from their mothers, I picked up my fork, set it back down, and I began. Before we eat, I said, setting down my own fork with a small, deliberate click against the china. And the table went quiet, the way rooms do when someone's tone doesn't match the occasion. I want to thank Harold for coming tonight. I gestured to the man at the far end of the table, 70-some years old, silver-haired, entirely unbothered by the sudden attention. He was Walter's attorney for 32 years, Daniel. Some of you have never even heard his name because your father never wanted you to know he had one. Kim's fork paused halfway to her mouth, hovering there a beat too long. Nora, is this really the time to be? I don't even know who this man is. It's exactly the time, I said, and I let my voice stay perfectly level, the way Walter's always did right before he said something that mattered. You made sure of that yourselves? 3 weeks ago, in my own front hallway, with a stack of donation bins. Daniel set his glass down slowly. Mom, what's going on? Harold opened the manila folder and slid 2 documents across the tablecloth, angled carefully so Daniel, not Kim, could read them first. Walter Whitfield established a royalty trust in 1994. He said, calm as a man reading off a weather report, unhurried in a way that made the whole table lean in despite itself. It was funded by patent licensing on a valve seal mechanism he invented independently of his employer, a design still in use across a significant share of the industrial valve market today. As of this month, the trust holds approximately $2.3 million. The transfer to its named successor, trustee Eleanor Whitfield, required physical presentation of one specific object, verified against a recorded serial number, within 90 days of Walter's passing. I reached into my handbag, and I set the watch down on the table, gently, in the open space between the candles, where every single person could see it. The watch you packed into a donation bin 3 weeks ago, Kim? Because it was, in your own words, just clutter, and not like it even works right anymore. Kim's mother let out a small, involuntary sound, somewhere between a cough and a laugh, and then immediately looked like she regretted making any sound at all. I retrieved it from Grace Street Mission the very next morning, I continued, folding my hands in my lap, keeping my eyes on Kim and nowhere else. I met with Harold 2 days after that. As of 11 o'clock this morning, several hours before any of you arrived at my door tonight, the trust was formally and legally transferred into my name. The filing is complete. There is nothing left to discuss, negotiate, or undo. I'm not telling you this so we can debate it, Kim. I'm telling you because you should hear it from me, at this table, before you hear a version of it from someone else. Daniel's face had gone the pale gray color I remembered from the week we buried his father. Kim's mother set down her wine glass very carefully, the deliberate slow-motion movement of a woman who has just realized she is a guest inside a story she doesn't understand and never will. Kim laughed. Too sharp, too fast, the particular sound of someone reaching for footing that had already given way beneath her. It's just an old watch, Nora. I genuinely don't understand why you're turning this into some kind of production in front of everyone. You thought you were clearing out an old man's clutter, I said, and I made certain my voice didn't rise even a single note, because Walter never raised his either, not once in 39 years, and some things you inherit from the people you love. You are unlocking a door you didn't even know existed, and you don't get to walk through it, not after what it cost you to find it. Dismissal came first. This is ridiculous. You can't seriously be doing this at Christmas in front of my own family. Then anger fast on its heels, Kim's chair scraping back hard against the floor as she stood, telling me I was being cruel, dramatic, that I'd always resented how close she and Daniel had gotten, how much time they'd spent in this house that apparently, according to her, I'd never really wanted them in to begin with. Then the guilt softer, aimed to land somewhere tender. After everything we've done for you this year, Nora moving in, taking care of you when you couldn't even function after the funeral. Then, when neither the anger nor the guilt moved a single muscle in my face, a threat aimed more at Daniel than at me, her voice climbing. Tell her this is insane. Tell her you won't let her do this. Daniel. And when Daniel said nothing at all, just sat there staring at the documents on the table, at his own father's careful block handwriting on the folder Harold had brought, the anger in Kim finally cracked all the bright way down into something smaller, something closer to true. Silence first, then quietly, her voice breaking in a way I hadn't heard from her before. Can we talk about this, just the two of us? We could have talked about this 3 weeks ago, I said, and for the first time all night, I let myself feel the full, quiet weight of everything I'd been carrying since that morning in the hallway. You chose not to. Now I'm choosing not to. Word travels fast in a family, even maybe especially the parts nobody involved wants known. By New Year's, most of the relatives who had sat around that table on Christmas Eve had quietly reached out to me directly, in ones and twos, usually by text at first, as if testing the water before they were willing to call. Kim's own sister phoned to apologize specifically for laughing at the cardigan comment weeks earlier, said she hadn't understood, in the moment, what exactly she'd been laughing at, or what it would come to mean. Even Kim's mother sent a card, stiff and formal, that said less than it probably should have, but was, I think, as close to an apology as that particular woman was ever going to manage. Only one person tried running the old script on me, and she did it from a safe distance. Over the phone, a full month after the fact, an aunt of Kim's I'd met exactly once, at that same wedding 8 years earlier. "Family should forgive, Nora," she said, in the practiced tone of someone who'd clearly rehearsed the line in the car. "It's the season for it, isn't it? Grudges don't look good on anyone." I didn't raise my voice for that one either. I've found, in the months since, that I don't need to raise my voice for very much anymore. Family is a verb, I told her, not just a noun. They stopped doing it a long time before I ever said a word about a trust or a watch. I'm not obligated to keep pretending otherwise just because the calendar happens to say December. She didn't call again after that, and I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I didn't miss the call at all. Daniel and Kim moved out in January, into a rental across town. Quietly, without the scene I half expected. Kim and I haven't spoken since that dinner, and I've made my peace with the possibility that we may not again for a long while. If ever Daniel comes by most Sundays now, though alone, unannounced sometimes, letting himself in the side door the way he did as a boy, and we don't talk about the trust, or the watch, or that particular night at that particular table. We talk about his father instead, what he was like at Daniel's age. The valve design he built in our garage on nights he thought I was already asleep. Which is, I've come to realize, all either of us actually wanted from each other in the first place, underneath everything else that got in the way of it. I still make eggs every Sunday morning. Low heat, patient. In that same cast iron pan Walter and I bought as newlyweds for $11 we didn't have 39 years ago. For 39 years, I timed them to the minute he'd walk back in from checking the garage, so they'd be hot the exact second he sat down across from me. I never once ate before he did. I never once sat down first. Not one single Sunday in nearly 4 decades, and I never thought of it as a sacrifice. Because it wasn't. It was simply how our mornings were built, the way a house is built around its load-bearing walls, without anyone remarking on them. These days, I make the same 2 eggs, in the same pan, on the same low heat, but I sit down while they're still cooking. Coffee poured, feet up on the chair across from me. I let the toast get exactly as dark as I actually like it, which Walter never did because he preferred his barely browned. And for 39 years I made it his way every single Sunday, without ever once mentioning that I preferred mine several shades darker. It's such a small thing. It took me 67 years to learn to want something out loud, even when the something in question was only toast. I've used part of the trust the way I think Walter would have wanted. I paid off what was left on the house outright, so no bin of donations, no well-meaning relative, could ever again make me feel like a guest in my own home. I set some aside for Daniel, quietly, in his name alone, and I kept a portion simply to live on, comfortably, without asking anyone's permission for how I spend a Tuesday afternoon. The watch sits in a small glass display case on my dresser now. Crystal repaired, case polished, running again for the first time in years after a jeweler in town coaxed the old movement back to life. I don't wear it. I don't need to, and besides, it was always built for a man's wrist, not mine. I just like knowing it's home, sitting where I can see it every morning, still keeping time exactly the way Walter intended. It to for the hours ahead, all of them. Mine now as much as they were ever his. If you're hearing this and you see even a small piece of yourself in my story, if someone in your life has started treating your quiet as an invitation, your grief as an inconvenience to be managed, your history as clutter to clear out before company arrives, I want you to hear this part clearly, because it took me 67 years and 1 cracked watch crystal to learn it myself. It is never too late to stop trading your own dignity for the illusion of keeping the peace. It is never too late to say the plain sentence you've been swallowing for months or years, because you were worried it would make you the difficult one. Being agreeable was never the same thing as being loved correctly, and somewhere along the way, I'd let myself forget the difference. To anyone out there who thinks the quiet ones in their family won't ever fight back, I'd offer this instead. We're not weak, and we're not slow to notice. We're simply choosing our moment, the way Walter chose his, quietly, thoroughly, patiently, 30 years ahead of schedule, without ever once raising his voice about it. I'm grateful now for all of it. Strange as that sounds, not for what was done to me. Never for that specifically. I don't romanticize the cruelty, and I won't pretend it didn't cost me something real. But I'm grateful for who I became the exact moment I stopped explaining myself to people who had already, quietly, decided not to listen. That version of myself was in there the whole time. It just took losing something precious and then finding it again to finally let her out. If this story meant something to you, stay a while longer. There's always another quiet woman finding her voice, and I'll be here next week to tell you about her.